Oh, okay. There we go. Good evening, everybody. My name's Arent Levine. I'm on the board of Mobile Monday DC and wanted to welcome you all to our panel discussion on mobility and the open internet. We want to give a big thanks again to the folks from Arent Fox for once again hosting us and providing the fabulous space and the food and drink outside. And thanks again to Stephanie Joyce from Arent Fox for agreeing to be our moderator this evening. Again, we try to organize these events on a mostly monthly basis. If you log on to dcmomo.com, you can sign up for our mailing list if you're not already on it and learn more about our events. If you want to share your thoughts about the event with the world, you can tweet to hashtag DCMomo. We'd love to see what you have to say up there. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. So that's all for me. I'll hand it off to Stephanie. Panel.
Good evening, welcome. I'm Stephanie Joyce. I'm a partner in our communications group here at Arent Fox. Very pleased you've joined us on this beautiful spring evening. Mobility and the open internet. As you can see, we do have live Wi-Fi in here. I'm logged on right now on my iPad and it is working. So don't be shy, come one, come all. Our panelists quickly they're Dan O'Connor, John Potter, Aaron Saunders, and Eric Wolf. And I'll provide longer bios and fun facts about these gentlemen in just a moment. Rules of the road. Panelist statements not to be attributed to their organizations unless they say otherwise. And as for me, I never know what I'm talking about anyway, so don't listen to me. No discussion about the legal basis of the Open Internet Order, or did we need it, or anything of that nature. I promised to bring a referee's whistle tonight. I couldn't find one, but given that it's Mobile Monday, I got a mobile app. And you may hear this if you cross-examine my panelists about why Title II belongs in open internet and why is the FCC regulating the internet. Don't make me use it. No handicapping the appeals. Again, nobody needs to take that road yet. We're here to talk about the practical effect on consumers, carriers, and app developers of the new order. And finally, and this one's really serious, do not talk to me about the NCAA tourney because my school lost on Saturday, and I'm in mourning. Very, very quickly, and printouts of these slides are available as you leave the auditorium tonight. What are the rules in the open internet? No blocking, no throttling, no paid prioritization. I've lifted these rules straight out of the order. Essentially, you can't block lawful content, applications or services, subject to, of course, reasonable network management. No throttling. Can't mess with someone's throughput, of course, subject to reasonable network management. No paid prioritization, which interestingly does not have the clause subject to reasonable network management. I'm not quite sure why, but that is how it is. So what do those words mean? This order applies to, quote, broadband internet access service or BIAS, which refers to a mass market retail service. That's very important to remember. You have to be what's called a common carrier selling service to the public for a fee. Paid prioritization is making some packets travel more quickly than others in exchange for money or some other kind of consideration, or to benefit an affiliated entity. So if someone who owns pipes also owns or has some kind of affiliation with a content provider, they can't make that content provider's stuff go faster. And reasonable network management, this is where the order, where the rubber of the order is gonna hit the road. There are huge caveats on the blocking and throttling rules. Essentially means that if accused of messing with someone's internet throughput, the common carrier can say, well, we were doing this in order to serve a truly technical purpose and not for a business reason. But it's, of course, a judgment call, and I think at least one of my panelists has some ideas about how that's going to play out. They apply to bias, both fixed and mobile. Of course, we're here to talk about mobile. It does not include a premises operator like Starbucks, or, this is important, services to big companies, companies that have custom contracts. These rules do not apply to those services. And a bit of a surprise, traffic exchange is exempt from the rules at this time. What is that? That's where networks meet. Some people wanted the FCC to ensure that the rules went all the way up into the network to ensure that throughput and connectivity was not in any way curtailed for nefarious reasons at where peering arrangements occur. And the FCC decided to punt on that. They went to case-by-case approach for adjudications. And in a clause that I find pretty funny, this order is complementary to vigorous antitrust enforcement. Those of you who know me know that I am biting my tongue right now at the thought of antitrust enforcement in the telecom space. All right, let's move to our discussion. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first panelist. Dan O'Connor, to my left, is the Vice President of Public Policy at the Computer and Communications Industry Association, or CCIA. Full disclosure, I have worked for CCIA for 14 years, and Dan joined CCIA in 2005 when he was 12. And he works on antitrust policy and business and technological developments. He focuses especially these days on patent reform. He works government relations and media outreach in both the States and in Europe. Before coming to CCIA, Dan was at, he changed his name. He was a legislative aide in the New York State Assembly. He has a master's degree in international policy, political economy from the London School of Economics. And he has his bachelor's of science in policy analysis and management from Cornell. And while he was at Cornell, he was in a rugby league that won the New York State Rugby Championship 3 years running. And more recently, he has played in the club circuit around here with a team called the Washington Irish, who are sponsored by Hoban's Pub, which is an establishment on DuPont Circle that I may or may not have frequented from time to time in the last few years. That's all I'm saying.
Is that a mid-roll? Is that a mid-roll ad there, sponsorship?
Yeah, no product placement there. So Dan, tell us about CCIA's take on open internet and areas of focus for you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Stephanie. And thank you for promoting Hoban's. We go all the way for our sponsors, but even the policy panels. But no, thank you. I think this is an important subject. To give you a brief background on CCIA, although this is with the necessary caveat that I'm not speaking for any members, and this is my own personal opinion. CCIA has been active in the open internet docket. You can read if you're more interested in the details, you could read our filing and that of many others in the docket.
Somebody really smart wrote those.
Yeah, Stephanie may have been the author of record on that. But yeah, so our membership includes companies like Google, Facebook, Yahoo. We also have hardware makers, semiconductor guys, and competitive telecom players such as T-Mobile and Sprint. So not everybody, actually, nobody sees eye to eye. There's a general consensus on some of the principles involved here. The details sometimes get a little tricky, and I'm not going to go into too much depth in my opening comments, but the issue that I'm going to focus on in our main area of concern is a industry association focused on competitive policy issues primarily is the way we see it and the necessity of the rules that Stephanie outlined. Of particular import to us, although all three are important, are the paid prioritization rules. We want to make sure that the whole internet ecosystem remains competitive, and that's the top layer of the internet, which we've seen the explosive growth of internet web pages and services, has generally been operating under non-discrimination principles, whether it was when you first dialed in over when it was dial-up, the underlying telecom service was protected by Title II regulation. And then since 2005, we've at least been operating under some sort of open internet principles. What isn't controversial is that broadband providers, both the DC Circuit affirmed this and several iterations of the agency have noted that the broadband providers have the incentive and ability to limit openness. They're gatekeepers on the internet. Now, the rules, how to form rules that are the least harmful way of maintaining openness have always been subject to debate. There's a number of incidents in the past, whether it's going back to Madison River of a telecom company blocking VoIP. You have BitTorrent blocking by Comcast. You have all sorts of other iterations of blocking of competitive payment options. In Europe, you've had telecom operators outright blocking Skype because it competes directly with their main business model. In the US, we have vertical integration concerns where you have the telecom operators are also owners of their own content, which gives them a natural incentive to discriminate. So we think that there is a need for, and we agree with the FCC's approach, that these rules were necessary in solving a problem that is becoming increasingly important going forward. So as far as some issues, I guess, so I'm not all one-sided, some areas where we have concerns about, some of which it's hard to avoid, there's a few areas where there's still case-by-case adjudication. So as Stephanie mentioned, the the interconnection points, which is what the Netflix dispute was all about, is basically been kicked down the road. And that is, if you're a cynical operator, you could basically do an end run around many of the protections in the order by moving your market power or moving the use of market power to the interconnection points. Now, that's a much harder issue to solve because that instead of preventing discrimination and blocking, now you have duties to provide certain levels of care. There's actually competitive arrangements where there's Netflix or others who actually are willing to pay for some of their proprietary technology to get moved closer to the internet access or the internet exchange points. So those issues, that's not going to be easy to solve, but it's incredibly important that these principles be applied and thought of in that context. And then another area that we have a major concerns about is the lawful content parts of the order, which basically said that users have the expectation of access to lawful content without defining without defining what lawful content is. So when you start looking at what we deal with a lot in the copyright blocking world, and a lot of our members, is that you have a lot of blocking or takedown requests premised on over expansive interpretations of what is infringing, sometimes outright wrong interpretations of what's infringing. And there's no method set up or process set up in this order to define lawful content. So one of our worries is that if you have the FCC starting blocking infringing content before it's adjudicated by the courts and determine what that infringing content is, you've kind of created a de facto legal regime without checks and balances. So that's one of the areas of the order that we're not thrilled about. But in general, we think it's a good start. And obviously this is going to be an issue going forward in the courts and at the regulatory agencies as these case-by-case situations are defined. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I am remiss, I forgot to introduce our good friend, Paul Brigner. He is not a DJ spinning tunes. He's over here. We are live streaming Momo for the first time from Arent Fox. And at the end of the slides, you will see there's a URL. This will be stored forever and ever, and you can access it and be thrilled all over again as if you were just here. Our next panelist is John Potter. He is the president of the App Developers Alliance. He has been on the, quote, bleeding edge, his term, unquote, for more than 20 years of tech and innovation policy. He is actually also a co-founder of the App Developers Alliance, which is 3 years old. It includes more than 200 companies and 50,000 developers, with staff in San Francisco, New York, Washington, London, and Brussels. Before doing the App Developers Alliance, he was the founder and executive director of the Digital Media Association, DIMA, which I have fond memories of. And it included such internet radio pioneers as Broadcast.com, Real Networks, Radio Sonic Net, and later Pandora, Netflix, and iTunes. Prior to running DIMA, he was in law and lobbying firms focusing, of course, on communications policy and copyright policy. This kills me. John worked on political campaigns as a teenager. Okay. And he gave his first speech about net neutrality in 2001, so he knows what he's talking about. John, can you give your organization's take in 3 minutes or less on the Open Internet Order?
No. Thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me to participate. Thanks to folks who are here. And again, I'll disassociate my organization from my random comments and whatever other behavior I offer you tonight. When we sit around and look at the Open Internet Order, we think there's a lot of chaos here, or that chaos is likely the result in the following context. There's a cultural opportunity that's been set up, and the culture is one of openness and transparency and fairness, and that has a lot of value. The end result of this order in the short term. So for those of you who are here saying, what does this mean to me in the next 90 days, 180 days, arguably even the next, I would say, 2 or 3 years potentially. What it means is if somebody's pushing you around, you have an outlet. You have somebody who you can complain to who will absolutely listen. They might listen and then think about it for 6 or 8 years. Because the FCC doesn't move quickly, and they have a hiring freeze, and they don't have ALJs to administer enforcement proceedings. And so, literally, this is a cultural change where somebody's going to come in and they're going to say, you need to pay me to do X. Or they'll say, if you don't do X, which of course won't be paid prioritization because it won't have anything to do with money or anything in return for whatever, right? Then maybe I'll hurt you by doing Y. And you'll have an outlet. Your outlet might be Wired Magazine, which is what it was until recently. Your outlet might be some CNET or some crazy blogger that you know who will write about it, right? It might be Joe Mullins and Ars Technica and other places like that. And they'll write about it, and they'll write about it in the context of, but the FCC said this is unlawful, arguably. And that's when you'll call Stephanie or some other great lawyer. And, I went to law school. I used to be a great lawyer, but now I'm out of prison and I do other things. But the cultural value is not insignificant. As to what it means practically, I'm not sure, and I don't think any of us up here is sure. I will tell you what it used to mean. When I did give my first net neutrality speech, and net neutrality is a brand that has morphed over the years as the underlying issues have changed. When I first got briefed about net neutrality, when I was running the Digital Media Association, it was Amazon.com saying to me, we're afraid that when you type Amazon.com as a URL, you're going to get taken to VerizonBooks.com. Oh, okay. Well, that's something I can fight against. And then the next thing was, we're afraid if you type in BarnesandNoble.com, you're going to get a pop-up for VerizonBooks.com, which you're not going to be able to escape, right? Or it's going to have a coupon for 45% off the very book that they know, because they were watching you surf, what you're looking for. And it was that sort of intrusiveness. Or it was Comcast, which back then had a limit in their agreement. They literally had a hard limit in their end user conditions, which said you are not permitted to stream more than 10 minutes of consecutive video. And so that was one we did go to the FCC on many, many years ago and said, this is outrageous, and all sorts of sunshine, a little cultural challenge, right? I don't think the FCC ever did anything. Somebody screamed at somebody and said, this is ridiculous. Nobody can stream 10 minutes of video over the internet. It doesn't work very well yet. Obviously now Comcast and others are streaming volumes, and movies and things like that. So what do we like about the order? We like the culture. What do we not like about the order? We're not really sure yet, because the order is going to take 3 or 5 or 10 years till we really know what it means. So as a practical matter, if I was out raising money today, this wouldn't be in my business plan.
John's here to provide the sunshine and light portion of the evening. He's such an optimist. So pleased to have him. Little reality never hurt anybody. Our next panelist is Arent Saunders. He is the CEO and founder of Clearly Innovative, Inc., which is a minority-owned digital solutions provider. It's headquartered here in DC and has offices in New York City. Clearly Innovative shapes ideas into viable products and transforms clients' technologies into stunning solutions. It is a leader in the early adaptation and implementation of cutting-edge technologies, including mobile strategy and design and innovative web-based solutions. It also provides support and expertise through services focused on product strategy, user experience, design, and development. Arent is a senior architect and software developer. He has over 25 years experience, is highly adept at helping organizations to add business value using mobile and web applications. He is recognized as a thought leader, and he published a book called Building Cross-Platform Apps Using Titanium, Alloy, and Appcelerator Cloud Services, which was published in November of 2014. He has a bachelor's in science and computer science from Ohio Wesleyan and an MBA in information technology, strategy, and marketing from NYU. Arent, please tell us your organization's take on open internet.
First of all, thank you for being invited here. I'm not a lawyer. My take on this really is, it's about openness and creativity, as we said, and also the name of my company is Clearly Innovative. We're about creating and not being, for lack of a better word, quote, constrained. So our hope is that when we meet with clients and they come up with great ideas on solutions to solve that, they don't need to worry about the network being a constraint, that they can think freely and innovate and create and grow and do things the best they can. It is kind of interesting to hear kind of the ups and downs of so far what the different panelists have said on how good they feel about things, but then it's kind of discouraging to hear that, yes, I can go complain to someone, but then I have to wait, 8, 9 years maybe before I get a positive result. But still, I'd like to believe and hope that this is moving us towards a direction where overall, as not just, a small company like us, but as a country, that we are free to innovate. And don't feel like, oh, I have to worry about, can I build this solution because I might, run into this law or run into this problem or run into this bandwidth issue or something like that. Also, my other little kind of, I don't want to call it it kind of was a passion project, which kind of grown into something bigger, is really providing technology, STEM education, and training into underserved communities. And a lot of these underserved communities are the same places that have issues with internet access, connectivity, and these sorts of challenges. So, my interest from that regard is hopes that they don't end up with the short end here. That they don't get squeezed, that specifically around content. I think one thing that could definitely make a difference in a lot of these communities is internet connectivity, content, additional education and training and services that aren't necessarily at that specific location, but then could potentially come in through a pipe, in the internet. And so you wouldn't want to feel like that money would be the differentiator between them getting those specific services. Thank you.
Thank you, Arent. Eric Wolf is to my far left. He is the Vice President for Technology, Strategy, and Planning at PBS. I've asked him, and no, he has no spoilers for Downton Abbey Season 6. He spends much of his time at the intersection of media, technology, and public policy. He works issues including the spectrum auctions at the FCC and working on PBS's next generation of content distribution. On a day-to-day basis, you're more likely to find him meeting with his team about project plans, budgets, and how to align and communicate within the organization. And today is very special. He wore a suit, but only because he had to go to the FCC.
Yeah, I wouldn't have worn it otherwise.
Prior to being at PBS, he was 9 years with AOL. Earlier in his career, Eric held technology and organizational leadership roles at Peter D. Hart Research, which was a public opinion research boutique, and Symbolics, Inc., which is a spinoff of MIT, working in advanced software development, artificial intelligence. He holds 3 U.S. patents in interactive communications technology. He has an undergraduate degree in computer science and political science from Brown. And he has followed Springsteen since and he's seen over 40 Springsteen shows, which is possibly my favorite fact about him.
There you go.
So Eric, please give us PBS's take on open internet.
Well, I'm going to give you my take on the open internet because PBS actually doesn't have an official take on the open internet. So with that caveat said, I actually think that the three of you were a terrific sampling of opinions really related to the way we think about this, and particularly what Arent was talking about, the delivery of services to people that need them and delivery of content to people that need them. That's obviously the focus that we bring to this issue. Just a couple of points. I think the first point I'd make is when we look at this order as a matter of public policy, this was a big step, right? Lots of headlines, lots of tweets, lots of filings, people blocking people in their driveways. I mean, this was, this was a big deal, right? And from a public policy point of view, it is a big deal. But in some senses, if you go back to the roots of the internet, and everybody made some reference to this, this is kind of not business as usual, but it's trying to maintain business as usual. The internet was designed as an open environment. The internet was intended by its originators to be to give everybody access to everything. So this is really an attempt to continue that. An attempt. We'll see how it works. Second point I'd like to make, if you're a content provider like we are, and particularly a non-commercial content provider, your biggest nightmare before this was the telecoms becoming gatekeepers, right? That's the scary scenario. There's somebody between me and the person I'm trying to serve, and they can charge me whatever they want to get to that person. And that was the kind of nightmare scenario. And a lot of people spent a lot of time worrying about how would we do that? What deals would we have to cut? What could this mean to our future for an organization like ours as we move from being totally a broadcast organization to being a blended organization trying to reach audiences wherever they are. And particularly if you're a nonprofit, the cost of content delivery is very real to us. So if somebody came to us and said, you're delivering an awful lot of videos over our network, we need to charge you a little bit in order to do that. That little bit, for a commercial provider, you say, this is bad, it's going to affect our business model. Okay, we need to sell more ads, right? And it affects the end user because now they're getting pre-roll and mid-roll and post-roll and pop-ups because they're getting more and more advertising to pay for the network capacity. If you're a nonprofit like we are, you start thinking, do I lower the bit rate of my video? Do I cut off how much video somebody can watch? It all affects the mission of what you're trying to accomplish. And that's not, these are material numbers for us. We deliver over 400 million streams a month just to kids. So if somebody came to us and said, we're going to add a small, let's say it's a penny a stream charge, well, that would be bigger than our entire content budget for kids for a year, right? Or if it was it would probably be much smaller than that. But that was sort of the nightmare scenario. So assuming that this is effective, this prevents the nightmare scenario for nonprofits, for startups, and for all those folks. We'll see if that really proves out. This has been kind of real for us already, but before the order. We've started investigating a couple of years ago complaints we were getting from viewers about streams that were being lost or being ineffective, and started to root around. And there's this little thing going in the back of your head: am I being discriminated against? Is somebody throttling me because they want to get their own bits through? And it turned out in the end, in this particular case that took a lot of study by a lot of our staff, that there was a fight going on between our CDN provider and one of the major broadband providers. And they had a fight, and we and all their other customers were being affected. And so we couldn't have known that. The end provider wasn't going to tell us that. The CDN wasn't going to tell us that. We had to go out, dig around, do a bunch of engineering work, figure out that there was actually effectively a net neutrality fight going on behind the scenes that we didn't know about, and re-engineer some of the way we did things to improve the service to our end users. So while this has not been a widespread problem, there have clearly been skirmishes and issues that have come up over the years, and companies have had to deal with it. And the last thing I'll say, just a complete side note, I actually suspect at some of the telecoms, some of the CTOs and the operations people are actually happy about this. They can't say it to their bosses, but they're probably actually happy because they were scared, I will bet, that their business people were going to come to them and say, listen, I need you to do this thing to the network to slow down those guys' content, and I need to have a dial in my office so I can turn it up and down based on the business deal. And they were either had already started getting or were going to start getting requests from their management to build into their technology infrastructure a bunch of stuff so that they could discriminate on traffic. I suspect being able to say, oh, we think that might run afoul of the FCC makes their lives a little bit easier. Just a guess.
I didn't even think of that scenario. It is all fun and games until you start throttling
Right.
Oscar the Grouch and Elmo.
That's what I'm saying. Don't mess with Big Bird.
Oh my golly. So before we open to audience questions, let me just throw out some questions that perhaps our panel may have a good take on. Touching all of the corners of the internet ecosystem, to borrow Dan's phrase. So Dan, let me start with you. And what do you think is the biggest upside for the rules for mobile users?
Sure. Sorry. Thank you. I guess that's a good question. I guess I don't want to start by saying that mobile users uniquely benefit. I think all internet users benefit from the content owners, not from the content owners, from the network providers, not messing with innovation in the over the top space and in not having their own incentives to kind of mess with the open and free market. I guess kind of the pivot on this question a little bit. Let's kind of talk about the differences, because as an association, even me individually, I thought a lot of the more insidious problems were not necessarily on the mobile wireless side, but on the actual fixed broadband side of this, to use the language of the order, where you have massive vertically integrated competitors. Not that competition is great in the mobile ecosystem, but for nationwide providers and some regional providers is better than, as the FCC order makes clear, when you're talking about high-speed broadband, like the type capable of you watching Netflix on, 45% of the U.S. only has one provider. So if you have two, you're very lucky, and three is almost unheard of. So that's the market reality you have in the fixed space. In the mobile space, it's still important, and as the commission says, and throughout the order, it could not justify not applying it to the mobile space, especially because so many Americans heavily rely on mobile broadband as their primary means of access to the internet, and particularly in low-income segments of the population, that might more likely be the only access they have to the internet. So, however, there are technical issues on the mobile side that are different that we're facing. There's one issue that is net neutrality at its heart, but the commission punted on, which is a zero rating, which is a situation where you have data caps and you have a block, or not a block, but you have a situation where somebody strikes a deal or is granted status where their traffic does not count against the data cap. The commission explicitly kind of kicked that one down the road. That's something that they're going to think about. Reasonable network management. Now, what people generally agree, including the commission, the last order said this more specifically. This order, they actually applied it to the wireless space, where the last order they did not, was that reasonable network management is a more complicated scenario in the mobile world. And that is going to be a case-by-case adjudication. And I think that, especially that area, is kind of what John gets at when he was saying that it might be, you might file a complaint, but it might be 6 or 8 years before that deals with. Like that I think is one of the areas that is it's going to be very tricky. So, I mean, those are some unique areas of the mobile world. I think the general benefit of the underlying principles is similar, but you have the way that the regulation is going to interface in the mobile and the fixed space is going to be a little different.
if anyone else has something to chime in, otherwise I will move on to content providers and ask Eric from PBS, what do you think the biggest upside of the order is for the content world?
Well, I think it's a little bit of what I said before, which is I think that it's the certainty. Certainty's a strong word, perhaps. It's the notion, and I think John said this before. You don't have to factor into your business plan. All right, now I've got to. I've got to put in the business plan a line item for how much I have to pay Comcast, Verizon, whoever to get my content to the customer. You don't actually spend your time worrying about that, hopefully.
And this question is for Arent and or John. Biggest upside of the new rules for app developers?
I mean, I really think it's like I said in the opening that it kind of takes away a fear that you might run into one of the big guys in some way, and that they could kind of apply pressure to you in a way because of the way the rules existed in the past and their financial position, specifically around, once again, content really is a big thing around the internet and this connectivity. I believe that once you get past a lot of the basic services that are being provided by a lot of mobile solutions right now, you'll find that content really is, they've said it in the past and they're starting to say it again, content really is king. Those little bits of data with information that it has the value of that information is the additional curation, the content that people are applying to it. Freedom. Not freedom. I don't want to sound kind of too, like this is, like internet is like a right of the world. But the freedom to know that you can, create these things, push this content down the path, have access to the path, I think is really important to innovation, which is what a lot of this is about. It's about somebody somewhere thinking up some idea that we haven't even thought of yet, and not having to say, oh well, I need to worry about this.
I would agree with that. I think there is if you will, the startup mentality, the entrepreneur's mentality. It goes to the culture, as I was saying before, is a can-do mentality, and I think that's true for the creator generally. People are excited not just to create content, but to deliver it and to test it. I think that positive culture is very beneficial to innovators. I think it's very beneficial to startups, and it will lead to positive results. What you do when you get really big, if Netflix really is 30 or 35% or 40% of broadband traffic, at some point, PBS is going to have a problem reaching the consumer, not because the network is saying, not because the carrier is saying, you haven't paid your bill this month, but because, in fact, the network is just clogged. And that is going to be the long-term challenge for all of us who are creating content and trying to deliver new services when if you will, the highway gets clogged, there's a traffic jam. We essentially outlawed HOV lanes. And you can think what you want about HOV lanes, but they are an interesting option. And I think the intention here was to eliminate that option in the internet.
So I guess I think that that's probably why the commission left the flexibility on in the center of the network, where you have the bigger providers coming together, not the last mile out to the consumer, where they're saying if a consumer asks for it, you got to deliver it as best you can, given all the other traffic. But at the center of the network, where some of the creative arrangements are starting to happen, and really the business is evolving, and you have larger players who are going to clash with one another over time, you'll see some fights. Those fights will continue, but that's where the business is actually going to evolve, probably in more interesting ways. And my guess is that's why they didn't sort of go all the way into laying down the law. They figured it was going to evolve rapidly, but you guys may know better than I do on that.
Well, I do recall there was quite a lot of talk before the FCC about all right, you're going to perhaps prohibit affirmative actions that are taken to block or throttle someone's access or to give someone paid prioritization in exchange for money or some other consideration. But what about passive throttling and blocking, where the broadband provider knows his ports are clogged, his backbone capacity is at max, and they choose not to deploy additional facilities? And the FCC said, well, we don't know about that either. We're just doing this today. So I think that may become another case-by-case adjudication situation. So we've already spoken a lot about how implementation could go, the challenges of interpreting reasonable network management, particularly in the mobile space, where the rule does say that the FCC will take into consideration the, quote, particular network architecture of the service. But even, all right, well, then what is that going to mean? We've also talked about the data caps. But can anyone provide us some sort of what some people call parallel thinking of areas of other areas of the internet besides transmission that the Open Internet Order could impact? John, I think you might have something to say about this one too.
We have a lot of concern about privacy. The FTC is the traditional federal regulator around privacy laws, and as some people may have occasionally read, there have been concerns about data that apps are collecting and what's being done with that data and whether the disclosures, the privacy policies are adequate. The challenge has been is now that if one considers broadband to be Title II, how does that extend to the content that's being carried over broadband? And does an app developer, an app publisher, now have two privacy regulators, because the FTC is going to be the privacy regulator of the app while it resides on my phone, but the data, and of course that's what everybody's really concerned about, as it is transmitted, is now suddenly being transmitted over a common carrier or over a broadband network, and therefore it is a common carrier, and so now I've got two. We're kind of concerned that that was not the end game here, that was not the goal. It is just got swept in with Title II, and the suggestion that the FTC and the FCC are going to do an MOU, which I don't see Chairwoman Ramirez embracing really quickly. Right, a memorandum of understanding about how they're going to divide up the privacy world, seems to conflict with statutory authorities in a sense that they don't have the ability. Yeah, the Constitution, come on, now you're being like a lawyer. So we're really concerned that we've now got not only the Honorable Kamala Harris in the California Attorney General's office, and the European Data Protection Supervisor over in Brussels, and the Federal Trade Commission, but now we've got the Federal Communications Commission also that's going to be trying to out-regulate and out-enforce the other privacy regulators.
Yeah, I'd just like to piggyback on some of what John is saying there. As far as arbitrary regulatory splits, we already have an antitrust, the FTC and the DOJ randomly splitting, but that's not for here nor there. Yeah, I agree with a lot of John said. I think, and I'm not a privacy expert, thank God we have privacy lawyers and staff for that. But that is an interesting thing. That's one of the things they didn't forbear on, and that's going to be an issue going forward. I think we already identified that reasonable network management definition, specialized concepts of specialized services and interconnection are all possibly could go any number of ways. It still has to be determined. They can go as far as the exceptions that eat the whole rule, or they can be interpreted by various regulators and courts and it could have unintended consequences. Sure. There are and maybe Stephanie actually might be for you to talk more about how the order addressed these. But you already saw in the first, very quickly thereafter, that major content providers the day or two after order were already pushing to get their stuff on the fast lane. But now the fast lane was going to be specialized services, which was exempted, and specialized services were dreamed up by the order of being things like very narrow definition. I forgot, actually, there was examples in the order of very narrow things, like you have a smart watch that manages your heartbeat and transmits it to a server back in like that is not a guarantee of having access to the open internet, right? It's just supposed to be that specialized service that does one thing. So I mean, but the whole concept of a specialized service or a managed service being different is inherently ambiguous. So that's an issue here. And then going outside the order, what's an unknown is how the politics of this play out, particularly across Europe. So I think the FCC actually did a commendable job of making it clear almost repeatedly and telling you what it wasn't talking about, that this kind of concept is not something that's going to expand beyond fixed providers of telecommunications. Now, the political knock-on effects is especially in Europe, there's something kicking around in the Digital Single Market Initiative called platform neutrality, which is coming at it from saying, internet companies now, you guys taking this loose conception of what's going on in the network neutrality space, saying, now you guys, whether it's Google and their algorithm, whether it's Facebook and their algorithm replacement, whether it's Amazon and their store, trying to apply the neutrality concept to those is far, well, I think unnecessary and very damaging to innovation. But it's kind of separated from what is really the problem in the telecom side. And the problem, in my view, on the telecom side is that you have gatekeepers and you have market situations that aren't competitive. But admittedly, nuance kind of gets scraped away when political motivations get in the mix. And in Europe, we are seeing a little bit of a knock-on effect here where this might extend beyond the platform regulation.
So actually, I'm going to take that on for a second, just because we need a little challenge here. Yeah. So I've noticed in my Google browser, when I go to certain sites, they come up in my daily summary of the sites I visit most. I've noticed that Netflix suddenly stopped coming up in that sites I've visited most. So it may just be a technical glitch, but I'm wondering whether that's Google discriminating against Netflix in showing me them as a frequently visited site, and if that's an example of a platform where there's platform discrimination going on. Just a question and a thought, and whether I'm not suggesting that ought to be regulated, but that might actually be the example. You're not their spokesman, and I'm not, but I think that's the kind of thing that you're talking about, right? That's the example of where people are trying to go with platform.
And I'm happy to. I mean, it's getting a little off the net neutrality, but this is a fun, for some controversy. I'll be happy to speak to that. I have no idea. I would be very surprised if Google is actually doing it. But okay, so what you have seen in the case, say the antitrust case over there, is where it's kind of an application of amorphous concept of this, right? Search neutrality. And then it gets very messy around, all right, well, Google's evolving their product. Or Facebook, with its algorithm, same thing. Facebook is prioritizing its own native content. Now, and it's actually harming the most, the site it's harming the most is YouTube, right? But there's pro-competitive reasons for why they're doing it. Namely because their stuff runs a lot better on their own app, and you don't have to leave. In the mobile world, leaving the native app is a lot more difficult than in the desktop world. So they have pro-competitive justification. Also, it benefits their business model. So I think in that world, it's a much trickier situation where you're saying, I can go to Pinterest, where I can go to Google, I can go to Facebook, I can go to Bing, there is the inherent, I guess from the economic standpoint, inherently the barriers to entry are very low on the internet. Right? And we've seen it, even companies that have unassailable leads, like Yahoo. In 1998, they said Yahoo effectively won the race for search, and economies of scale mean that it'll never switch. Well, Google took them up with a better business model. Now you have Facebook, which was not monetizing ads correctly, can never challenge Google. Now they're driving more traffic to websites than even Google. So we see a very dynamic, innovative marketplace, which I think is driven by these underlying things. Where in the telecom space, it's just the massive amounts of capital and the geographic reach of what you need it just not lend itself well to a competitive environment that checks against anti-competitive tendencies. So that's my differentiation, if you will.
Start thinking of fun questions. I'm going to let John respond. He's to burst over.
I'm just wondering about that admonition earlier about what makes it reasonable to regulate one set of players versus unreasonable to regulate another. When we talked with most of our companies, the smaller companies who are the ones that really matter to us, the justification to the common person that we found was about government subsidies, right? And that the bells or whatever had been created with government money, and this was sort of an overhang or a hangover, depending on which way you look at it, of an old model. But nobody's saying that about the broadcasters, as they're in fact selling back their spectrum. But it's interesting that that's not, there's a whole, the idea of platform neutrality versus device neutrality versus app store neutrality versus literally retail store neutrality, right? In case anybody doesn't notice, you can't use Amazon payments on eBay. You can't use PayPal on Amazon, right? Is somebody going to say, ooh, there should be store level neutrality? This is very dicey stuff, and this is a very interesting road we're traveling. So I think that we all should be watching this very carefully, and we'll all come back in 10 years and decide if we did the right thing.
Reunion panel.
More crab cakes and wine, and we'll hang out. I will say, I have to be a lawyer for just a moment. The Communications Act applies to communications by wire or radio. So I'm not sure the FCC would get away with regulating the App Store, but I've been wrong many times about the FCC.
Actually, I'll just jump in with a comment. I mean, and just the whole notion of platform neutrality and all of these other things. I think, net neutrality opens up the wires. Hopefully the content all comes down the wires. We can all get the content we desire. That's great. I actually think the next frontier for a lot of content companies and app companies is going to be about discovery. Because if you can't find my content, then it doesn't matter if the wire's open, because it's never going to come down the wire, right? You're not going to be asking for it. And so I think this is, maybe a good thing, but it's, you look a few years down the road, and even if net neutrality is baked in and assumed everywhere, we're going to have much harder challenges in getting seen and getting out there.
Anybody have a question for our panelists? In the front?
Okay, speak on that it would harm, or whether it would or wouldn't. Okay.
Yeah, the question was, I didn't get your affiliation, but the question is,
Okay.
excellent. The question was what Dan thinks about what the open internet may or may not do in terms of mobile investment in the infrastructure of the mobile network.
Sure. Now, I'm not going to attribute any individual thoughts or comments to members. Obviously, that would make my life in association world very brief if I started doing that. But in general, there's different views on this, right? But the FCC clearly goes into it. I guess I can only really speak to my view on the investment claims. And time again, we've seen these claims that whether it's mergers, if you don't let us go through, we're not going to be able to invest. If you do these regulations and rules, we're not going to be able to invest. One thing I can speak to is Sprint, who is a member of ours, came out publicly and said, listen, I know what people are saying is doom and gloom here, but we're still going to invest. This is not going to harm our ability to invest. And I think that's closer. I mean, it's hard to say the full knock-on effect of all this stuff. But at the end of the day, if you create a level playing field, right, and this is kind of what the 706 authority is justifying, okay, on the virtuous cycle of if you kind of get the rules right, then the actual incentives for the providers will be, the network providers will be to invest, because that's how they expand output, and that's how they expand, and that's how they generate customers. Now, in a world where there aren't clear rules about this, you might actually have investment issues, because then your business models are mixed. You create scarcity, and then you sell the fast lane. The fast lane becomes more valuable the more scarcity there is. So, I mean, I actually think that this will probably be better for investment innovation, but at the very least, I don't think this is going to be harmful than it would otherwise be. But there's a lot of unknowns out there. So,
Anyone else have a question or a comment about investment? Any other questions? Mr. Oren Levine from PBS.
Hi, and thanks for Mobile Monday. What little I know about this, which is very little I know from being an economist, market share, especially if they have wireless providers or cable providers.
I'm happy to take
I
it.
mean, let's be honest with ourselves, right? This is government and economics and politics and media and messaging at work, and we can choose to agree or choose to disagree, and the economists can argue both sides. I can argue, as I sort of alluded to earlier, that if you say that we're not allowed to build HOV lanes, then what do we do if there's too much traffic in the road? How do we incentivize? What is the next level of building and who builds it? And I think that's what the carriers have been saying is, what's our incentive to build it? If Eric, it's Eric, right? I apologize. If Eric is correct that the order was really focusing on the on-ramps and off-ramps, and we can build HOV lanes and we can have creative marketplace arrangements in the pipes, if you will, the long lines, right? And we're really talking about the on-ramps and off-ramps. Those can get clogged up faster than the big pipes in the middle. And so then what do we do to incentivize people to create on-ramps and off-ramps? And then, if you will, right here in DC, in a sense, we're blessed, right? You have, if I remember right, we have Comcast, we have the FiOS, we have the two big carriers, right? You have AT&T, and then you also have RCN, and I don't know who RCN is overbuilding on and how that sort of works its way through the economics of it all. But we can say that the open internet justifies new investment at the on-ramps and off-ramps, right? The last mile to the home or the last 500 feet to the home, or whatever it is. But we can also argue that if they can't charge enough, will they be able to, right? And how can you charge enough against a behemoth who's in the market for the long run and you're trying to get in the market for the short run? Can you raise the capital from those investors and things like that? So I honestly, with all due respect, and I love economists too, I think the economists can argue not only both sides of this, but all sides of this. And it depends on which piece of the highway, to stay with my example, they're looking at, and which side they've been paid by, with all due respect to economists.
I would, my input on that is I think it is generally a true statement.
That's twice you've generally agreed with me.
Yeah. I was talking about the question, but I generally agree with you too.
Over under on that.
Yeah, but I do think that the root of these most of the tech business ecosystem, I'm separating myself now. I'm the policy. I don't actually make useful stuff like most of the people in the industry. I'm a useless appendage, but I think that
Clean up good.
yeah, well, maybe not. I don't know, but I think that it does come down to it is generally the approach of policy, tech world to policy, is that we prefer to leave it more the Wild West and not have regulation. However, in this particular situation, it is, I think, the roots of this are not technically a monopoly, but lack of competition. Lack of competition creates you to a world where you no longer have the first best world. You have to choose between second best worlds. And I think people do have arguments of whether letting the oligopolists play out is going to be better than having a regulatory approach to the FCC. I personally am on the belief that having ground rules of the world with this forbearance that's built in is probably a better way to go, because there certainly are problems that can manifest in that. But I think you're right that at the end of the day, the differentiating factor here and the premise of the regulation is there's a competition problem, and it's not being solved anytime soon because of the underlying market dynamics of providing large-scale broadband.
And look, let's be clear. The carriers have the method and the opportunity, right, to extract monopoly rents for the most part. That's the traditional economics. I think everybody would agree on that. If you are interested in transporting furniture from Boston to New York, in the old days, you had to go through the Connecticut Turnpike. They could raise their tolls however much they wanted because, you know what, it was a lot bigger hassle to go around. And that's the old carrier model, and it was a good model for a long time. The question is whether they got smacked around enough and outed enough in the press and in the blogosphere and things like that they've sort of said, oh, we won't do that. We'll forbear. And instead the government is coming in and saying, no. We're going to tell you what to do, and then we'll forbear from telling you other things to do.
right? And that's what we've chosen. We elected President Obama. He said he was going to do this. Nobody can say he didn't stick to his word on this one, right? He's done it. Whether Chairman Wheeler has done it, but other people have a different way of saying it. So look, it is. We're going to test this out. We're going to probably test this out at least until one of two things happens. One is it succeeds, and the other is a Republican gets elected to the White House.
Any other questions from the audience? We've answered all of your questions already. I knew I had a great panel here. Well, it is 8:02, so you have been given your hour. If you have no further questions, I think the bar is still open. You can grab the slides on the way out if you like. And this live stream is going to be stored at that URL there on the bottom. The next Momo DC event will be in May, and stay tuned for that. You'll find the announcement on their website, dcmomo.com. Thanks so much for coming. Have a good evening.
I was thinking about